Hey, this is former Blue Devil lineman Matt Skura. You're listening to Basketball Conference, the ACC football podcast. Go Duke, go ACC.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to Basketball Conference, the ACC football podcast. My name is Mike McDaniel. Season previews roll on. It is time to talk NC State football. James Henderson, InsidePackSports.com. You are back, friend of the show, second year in a row. Thank you for making this work. We are happy to have you back. What's going on, man?
As always, Mike, anytime, man, get me on. Getting over a little cold, so I may have a little raspy voice here, but I'll make it through.
All good. All good. Yeah, I know we were messaging a lot and trying to find a time that works. Glad we were able to do that. NC State is one of those really, really interesting teams heading into 2025. A very different vibe this year, I would say, relative to last year when we talked. I think expectations, obviously, last year pretty high with Grayson McCall. Everybody thinking the team was going to do, I think, a lot better than it did. Obviously, finishing 6-7 with a loss in the Military Bowl. The conversation, I want to start here, conversation around Dave Doeren, because, you know, I think we haven't had a conversation about his job security in a while. Obviously, I think about, 10 or so years ago, it was a conversation we'd have like every other year. And now we're here 10 years later. And a lot of it is because he's run a really stable program over the last decade. And then last year, obviously, was the first time in a while that there were pretty high expectations, and the team obviously fell short. McCall gets hurt after 4 games. They turn to CJ Bailey, a true freshman, who obviously showed a lot of promise. But things kind of went off the rails pretty quickly. So what's the vibe around Doeren heading into 2025? Obviously, he's been with NC State for quite some time. I'm just interested in kind of what the fan base is thinking and what the general vibe is around the program heading into the new season.
Yeah, well, it's always a "what have you done for me lately" deal, right? And I think probably more than ever now with the transfer portal, revenue share, all those different things. But I say that I haven't really heard a ton in terms of job security on Dave Doeren. I kind of just feel like it's reached a point where it's his program. And if you were looking at the season objectively, and I think NC State AD Vu Corrigan, he tends to do that. He tends to kind of have a broad look at programs. I think when he evaluates them, you would look at last season and say, well, Grayson McCall finished 2 games and you played a true freshman quarterback behind him. And I don't know what, for most programs, I mean, you go back to 2022 for Dave Doeren, they started 4 quarterbacks that year and went 8-4 in the regular season. I mean, I thought he could have won Coach of the Year that year in the ACC
Right.
when you start 4 quarterbacks, right? And so I think it's one of those things where you were in some games you could have won. I mean, they finished 6-6 in the regular season. I think they led, I want to say, Georgia Tech and Wake Forest inside of the final 2 minutes and lost both of those games. 8-4 sounds a little different, right? And so I think they were close. But when you get to the end of the year and you finish 6-7, yeah, you're going to be questioning, I think, what you have coming out of the year. The good news, I think, for NC State fans is when you look at Dave Doeren's track record there, he's been in this spot 3 times now. I've been talking about this stat frequently. He's had 3 years at NC State where he's finished with 6 or fewer wins. You go to 2013, his first season. 2019, they went 4-8. And then 2016, they went 6-6. He followed up all 3 of those seasons with 8 or 9 win years. And so I think he's shown, and when you talk about, well, how can he still be at NC State for 12, 13 years? It's because anytime he's faced adversity, they've kind of answered it, right? Like if you go and win 3 games and you follow it up with an 8-win season, you're not getting fired, right? You win 4 and you follow it up with a 9-win season, you're not getting fired. And so I think that's what he's been able to do in terms of, job security and how he's kept it. But you're coming off a 6-7 year. There's going to always be some questions.
Yeah, he's turned NC State, especially over the last 8 or 9 years, 2019 notwithstanding. I mean, he's turned this into an 8 or 9 win program pretty consistently. So I think it's pretty fair to look at 2024 as an aberration more than the norm, especially considering the injury of quarterback early in the year and turning to a true freshman and kind of what that yielded. So that leads right into my next question. obviously a little bit of a sense of urgency. Robert and I fired. Kurt Roper comes in. CJ Bailey entering year 2. And James, I'll remember last year, I was not quite as high on Grayson McCall making the jump to NC State as you were. But this year, I must say, I'm very high on CJ Bailey. Like, I think he can easily jump up and be one of the 3 or 4 best quarterbacks in the ACC. Some people would say, oh, well, that's because it's a weak quarterback conference. I would say I just think he's really, really good. I mean, he's going to be a true sophomore, and I think he flashed enough last year that, there could be expectations around him coming into this year. So my question for you is, with a new offensive coordinator in tow, what are fair expectations for CJ Bailey heading into year 2, given what we saw in the 8 or so games that he played last year?
I think you should have high expectations, right? I mean, we're talking about a guy who I think he made 9 starts last year, and you're right, he looked totally comfortable. I mean, for a guy who his first career start, I believe, was at Clemson. That was his first career start. And, you get thrown into that. And he goes there and he played solid. I mean, it was a game they lost 50-35, but he's 16 of 25, averaged 8 yards per attempt. I mean, he was solid. And I think what I like best about CJ is I feel like he's a playmaker. I feel like he's a guy who can make plays, whether on script, off script. And in college football, pro football, you need your quarterback to be able to do that. I mean, especially I think if you're a program like NC State where you need to do more than manage the game. If you're going to really, make it in terms of cracking into that top 1 or 2 of the ACC, you need to do more than manage the game at that position if you're NC State, because the other pieces don't add up enough to where they can carry you with you game managing. And so I think his ability to make plays, whether it's with his feet or with his arm, really give him an opportunity. And the other thing is the continuity. The last 2 years in 2022, NC State went into the year with Brennan Armstrong as a transfer quarterback. In 23, you had Grayson McCall. And so you didn't really have that continuity that CJ was able to have from December to the spring, to the summer, to the fall, to where he's locked in with his receivers. He's locked in with his O-line, his running back. He was just voted captain. I think he's the first sophomore captain under Dave Doran at NC State. And so for all those reasons, I think they have high expectations for Bailey. And I'll just throw this out here. I know you asked about Kurt Roper. He coached at Duke, where he really kind of made his way as an OC, and obviously worked some at South Carolina. But he's been OC for 1 game at NC State, and that was in 2022. He called the bowl game against Maryland, and they lost that game 16-12. And Ben Finley was the quarterback. He threw the ball 48 times.
Ben Finley, that's a throwback, huh?
Yeah, in a game they lost 16-12, he had 48 passing attempts. And so, to me, if I'm looking at CJ Bailey, and we're going to talk, I'm sure, about his weapons.
Yeah,
I think you're going to see them allow him to throw the football around much more this year to all the weapons they have.
Justin Jolly at tight end, Noah Rogers at receiver. You got Hollywood Smothers back in the fold after a promising freshman year. I mean, there are players here. Like, there are playmakers around CJ Bailey. I think there's a reason to be optimistic there.
Oh, 100%. Justin Jolie, preseason All ACC, first team at the tight end position, one of the top tight ends in the country. I actually think Hollywood Smothers is their best player. I mean, you look at some of his numbers from a PFF perspective. He led the ACC running backs last year in receiving grade. He was second in yards per carry. He was first in missed tackles forced percentage. I mean, he was really, really good at that running back position. And he's also, like I said, when you're talking about throwing the football, he can catch it as well as anybody and make big plays through the air. And I think that's going to help your quarterback out. So I think when they look at when you have the pieces they have, the vibe I get is they feel like it's kind of hard to screw it up. And that's not a knock on Bailey. I think it just kind of I think State feels like we've got good enough pieces to where if he just takes any step at all, it's hard to imagine him not having a big year, especially when on the other side, you're going through a defensive coordinator change, which we'll probably talk about. You may be in some more shootouts, so you may have to score more. And I think, like, nationally, a lot of people look at NC State and they say, oh, well, they lost Kevin Concepcion. They're going to take a step back offensively. Well, KC didn't have a good year last year.
No.
Like, statistically, he did not have a good year. He graded out, according to PFF, as one of their lowest graded wide receivers. He just didn't have a good year. That's not a knock. KC's a great player. It just didn't work out last year for him. And I think it was one of those moves that State probably views as addition by subtraction, because I think they felt like last year, a lot of times, if you go and look at their tapes, it was like You'd have Bailey in the offense making plays, and then you'd randomly be trying to find these spots where you got Casey involved to just get him involved. And it never really meshed. And I think they feel like him going in a different direction, them going in a different direction is going to help out the offense a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think the national narrative will be about him leaving because that's just what people tend to grab onto when they're not looking at the program or even looking at the conference consistently. But yeah, you're right. I mean, Casey Concepcion did not have a good year last year. That was obviously a big name heading into 24 because of what he did 2 years ago. I think that was all fair. The expectations on him were fair. Didn't have a good year. Offense as a whole, obviously up and down, but I agree with you. I think it did feel like it was a square peg round hole type thing last year, especially when CJ Bailey came into the fold. I'm not sure why that is, and that was actually my next question. Like, what do you think it was that, I guess, didn't allow Bailey in particular to mesh as well with Concepcion? Was it just offensive fit, things looking a little bit different stylistically? Like, what do you think it really was?
Yeah, I think Bailey is more willing to distribute the ball. You go and look at last year at Grayson. And again, I'm not saying this is a knock on McCall, but the first game of the season against Western Carolina, I think KC had 15 targets in that game. And he might have had 14 catches. And I mean, three touchdowns. I mean, that was – but it was almost like that's the only guy I'm looking for. Right? That's the only thing I'm trying to make happen. And you can't sustain that over the course of a season, especially now that teams had tape on KC and different things like that. Really, I think that's what happened. I think a lot of what he did as a freshman, whether it was the jet sweep game, lining him up at running back, doing some different things like that, teams game plan for it more. And so those plays became less effective, and he never really took that next step in terms of becoming a true slot receiver where he's going down the field and making plays, catching the football down the field consistently. And so once you took kind of the gadget stuff away, it just didn't work. And I think CJ was maybe more willing to distribute it. And maybe State wanted to open it up a little bit more with him just because. But yeah, I think that's one of their deals is they feel like you're going to see other wideouts emerge this year with more opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. Makes sense to me. Okay, let's talk the defensive coordinator change, right? DJ Elliott coming in. From a scheme standpoint, what should we expect? How is it going to differ? What should we be looking for there?
Yeah, it's going to differ a lot. Tony Gibson, I think Tony Gibson is a big reason why Dave Doeren is still at NC State, if I'm being honest with you. His defenses the last 5 years have just been, they've been the strength of this team, dating all the way back to 2021, where they relied on guys like Drake Thomas, Peyton Wilson, Isaiah Moore, Davin Vann to just win games for him. Yeah. But I will say with Tony, you had the 3-3 stack, and it was a very rigid defense. You kind of knew what you were getting. You were getting a lot of blitzes, a lot of cover one. You were getting a lot of pressures. They would not match personnel. And it was one of those deals. I always say this to people. A lot of times when you see an AD make a coaching change, they tend to go in the complete opposite direction of their head coach, right? So, like if your head coach was an offensive-minded guy and it doesn't work out, what do? They go and hire a defensive-minded guy, right? Or vice versa. And I feel like what Dave did with Elliott was he said, you know what, Tony, we're going to go in a different direction in the 3-3-5. Tony was really rigid in what he ran in terms of just he kept his base personnel out there a lot. You knew what you were going to get from him, and they were really good at it. I'm not knocking that at all. I think, though, that fit well when you were playing more Big 12 style teams. And what I mean by that is, there was a stretch of years where teams were playing so much up tempo and so much spread to where it was ideal to be in base and kind of operating out of that. Well, now you're seeing teams maybe go back to huddling more. You're seeing teams now run clock and substitute every play and play different personnel packages. And they did that to NC State last year, and I didn't think State really adjusted to it. And so Elliott's completely different. I think what you're going to get from him is a much more versatile scheme. You're going to get State matching personnel more frequently. You're going to see them with some 4-man fronts, some 3-man fronts, some sim pressures, just a totally different look. And I think they feel like it better meshes with the style of the offenses you're facing now. And so that's their hope. The question for me, as always, we can talk all we want about the X's and O's and all that stuff. Do you got the dudes to do it? Right? Because it still comes down to you have playmakers. I mean, Tony didn't change from 21 to 24. right? I mean, you just don't have you didn't have Peyton Wilson anymore last year.
Right.
It kind of matters. And so has NC State solved that part of it? That's what I'm going to be looking for.
They bring in Trey Thomas from Temple. It feels like a veteran front seven. I know they're breaking in some new pieces in the secondary. I guess secondary is the biggest question. Obviously, in addition to the scheme change.
Well, I think for a lot of people, I love what State did defensively in terms of the transfer portal. I thought they should have been more aggressive offensively and some of the things they could have done. But defensively, man, they threw a lot of darts at the transfer portal. They took the approach of we're going to just bring in as many different pieces as we can, and we're going to see if it works itself out. And in the secondary, for instance, you mentioned they bring back Devon Marshall, who was starting for them late in the year last year. They go out and get Brian Nelson, who was first team all conference at North Texas. They go out and get Jamel Johnson, who was all conference at Temple. They went out and got J.J. Johnson, who was all conference at Georgia State. So they brought in 3 all conference caliber players in the secondary, and their belief is these guys that are at G5 programs, if you're an all conference player on a G5 team, you can be a good player in a P4 program. And I think State took a lot of guys that fit that mode. I went back and looked coming into this year. State had, I believe it was 10 players who were either preseason all ACC this year or had been all conference at a different school prior to NC State on their defense. And so I think they said, we're going to try and bring in good players from lower programs, and we'll see if it works.
It's worked for a lot of teams across the conference, truthfully. A lot of teams in the NC State mold have brought in guys from a lower tier. I'm a Virginia Tech alum, so I look at Bayshall Tootin coming from a lower level, right? Jumping up.
Example. Bayshall Tootin, a perfect example. I mean, like you Virginia Tech brought him in. I guarantee you nobody thought twice about they added Bayshall Tootin. You know, I'm looking at Pitt last year, Desmond Reed at the running back position.
That's right.
Duke, I want to say Duke's 3 best defensive players last year outside of their secondary were Ivy League transfers.
Yep. So
there are good players everywhere, man. You just have to be willing to take them and trust that they can play.
Yeah. Yeah. You can play at a lower level. In a lot of cases, you can play at a higher level. Yeah. Football player is a football player. Let's take a look at the schedule. And James, I'll tell you what, man, we just did a preview earlier today for Boston College, and their schedule sucks. And I look at this and NC State's schedule. If you're going to break in 2 new coordinators, you're going to have a sophomore quarterback with young playmakers around him and a new secondary. This is the schedule you want, right? Yeah. This is the schedule you want. This is workable, James. Like, I'm looking at this. Traveling to South Bend October 11th, that sucks. Going to Miami in November 15th, like, if you're going to draw like the second toughest team on your schedule is going to be maybe Miami. That's the one you want to draw. You don't want to draw Clemson.
And I'll add a late November Miami. Who knows what you're getting, right? You go look at Miami's track record. By the end of the year, some years they're done. They're checked out.
Right on the money.
Yeah.
Right on the money. Right on the money. And if you want to get them, you want to get them in November.
Right.
So, I mean, I look at this. This is really workable. I look at a few swing games. Okay. At Duke, September 20th, because I think Duke's got a manageable schedule. I think they have a good team. Darian Mensah, I think, is an upgraded quarterback. Virginia Tech, because I'm a Hokie alum, I don't think Virginia Tech is as good as NC State, but I think that obviously having Virginia Tech come to Carter Finley, that could be a tough game. At Notre Dame is obviously one of the toughest games on the schedule, but at Pitt, Georgia Tech, that those 2 kind of sandwiching the bye weeks, I think could make or break NC State. I look at this. This feels like 8-4 to me, which I know it was a down year last year, but I'm very high on CJ Bailey. I like the coordinator changes. I like what they brought in with the secondary, and I like the playmakers. I think this feels like 8 wins to me, James. Talk me out of it, unless you agree.
No, I think you're right on. And the funny thing about it is if you look back at it, the schedule, and you said that was an 8-4 schedule, you'd be like, that's an impressive 8-4.
Right.
Because if you look at their non-conference slate, they've got Campbell, but you have to remember they play Virginia out of conference this year. And they play East Carolina, who is an in-state rival for a lot of fans. They open the season with them. Then you go to Notre Dame. So those are your 4 non-conference games. Those are 4. You're not playing. I mean, obviously you got Campbell, but the other 3, I mean, those are 3 legitimate opponents.
Yep.
And then you get into your ACC schedule with games against Florida State, Miami. Obviously, North Carolina's a rivalry game. You got Virginia Tech. I'm with you. I mean, Virginia Tech's always tough, so you have to win that one. But, I mean, I think if you had got to the end of it and it was 8-4, and then you went back and looked at each game, you'd feel, I believe, a lot better about an 8-4 year than maybe most years when you go 8-4, because there's not a ton of layups there from a name standpoint, but there are games that you think you got a pretty good shot at winning.
Yeah, I mean, in particular, like having the bye week after going to South Bend, I think is pretty significant before you travel to Pitt. I think that's a really well-positioned bye week for NC State. Having Georgia Tech at home, I think, considering what Georgia Tech's bringing back, getting them at Carter Finley, I think is significant than having a bye week before that closing stretch against the 2 Florida schools and North Carolina. I mean, we'll talk about, hey, what's Miami going to be in November? What's Florida State going to be? Like, is Norvell even coaching that game?
Yeah.
I could see a couple different scenarios there. And then Carolina is the question of the entire conference. Like, what's Belichick? What is this going to be with Gio Lopez, probably a quarterback, and obviously Belichick? There's a ton of intrigue there for obvious reasons. And having that as a rivalry game at the end of the year, like usual, that could be a huge. It's always is a huge game, but it could be a huge game in terms of implications for maybe an ACC title appearance, considering this conference schedule. NC State's a nice little. I mean, I look at this. NC State's a nice little dark horse pick to make it to Charlotte, in my opinion. Right? I mean, given how this is laid out, UVA being a non-con game, given how the conference schedule lays out, and you miss Clemson, I think is significant. You miss SMU. SMU is probably going to take a little bit of a step back, but you miss them. You miss Louisville. It's workable. It's certainly workable.
Yeah, when I looked at the schedule, I kind of broke it down into 2 segments. I think your first 6 games, you've got East Carolina, Virginia at home, Wake Forest, Duke, Virginia Tech, and Campbell. So you get all the way to mid-October, and you haven't left North Carolina yet.
Yeah,
you got 4 games in Raleigh, you got the game in Durham, you got the game in Winston-Salem. But I think you say, okay, we need to get out of that part 5-1, right? Like, I think that's the vibe you got to have, because the back end, it's not pretty. Now, again, I think there's games, like you said, there's games that you could kind of talk yourself into for NC State. But when you start thinking about it, after Campbell, you got 3 out of 4 on the road, at Notre Dame, at Pitt, at Miami, and then in the middle you've got Georgia Tech. Who I'm a big Georgia Tech fan this year. I think their schedule sets up well. I think they're another team who I feel like have a legitimate chance to get to the title game. But that's your one non-road game, is Georgia Tech at home. But you're right. I mean, I think what helps State during that final 6-game stretch is the way the bye set up, because you face Notre Dame, then you get your bye. And then you have that 2-game stretch of Pitt, Georgia Tech. Well, okay, now you get another bye before Miami. And so you can kind of play it in like segments, right, where you can reload and kind of rest up and refocus, to where if you are 6-0, 5-1 coming out of that stretch, and we know Notre Dame doesn't really factor into the conference race.
Right.
I'm a believer, man, that when you get to mid-October and on, it's about being in a position to have something to play for. I mean, you talked about it with Miami, Florida State. Who knows? I go back to, I think it was 2018 NC State. I'm going to bring that up to make sure I'm right. That year, NC State won 9 regular season games. And to me, it wasn't really one of Dave's best teams by far. I mean, they were a good team, but I don't think they were necessarily one of their best teams. But when you look at that schedule, I mean, they ended the regular season at Louisville, at North Carolina, both on the road, where if you come into the season and you're like, all right, this was the first year after Lamar Jackson. We've got Louisville on the road, and then we're at North Carolina with Larry Fedora. You don't like that. But then you get to the end of the schedule, both of those schools have fired their head coach because the season had fallen apart. And so now you go in and you roll both of those teams, you win both of those games, because they really didn't have anything to play for, and you still were kind of competing for something. So I think that's why for State it's important to get to a hot start. If they come out of that first 6 games 3-3, it's going to be tough. I think it's going to be tough, because they're not going to have momentum. And then that back end, you've got some games you can maybe talk yourself into wins. But man, you can also look at it from a dim outlook and feel not so strong about it. Yeah.
I'm with you. I mean, I like how it sets up. I like the bye weeks. It's not the worst schedule I've seen. I've seen, like I mentioned,
seen Syracuse's yet?
Yeah, Syracuse. Yeah, I have. Syracuse has a real tough road. BC has a real tough road, and then I've seen the flip side. I've seen like Virginia's schedule, which is sharp and soft, and it's all about draw in this conference now. It really is. I've seen SMU's, which is a lot tougher than last year, but much tougher road. So It's all about draw, and I think if you're an NC State fan, you got to be pretty happy with how things shook out here, with your toughest game being Notre Dame, not a real ACC team, right? So I think you got to be happy with how this shook out. James, really appreciate it. Want to give you an opportunity, obviously, to plug where you're at Inside Pack Sports. You guys do terrific work, but want to give you an opportunity to plug where you're at and where we can find the best NC State coverage.
Yeah, www.insidepacksports.com. I started up the company in 2017. We've been covering NC State all the way since then. Subscription website, independent website, so we're not a part of a network. We do everything on our own there, which is really cool. I'm kind of proud of that. A lot of work, but we do really in-depth coverage. We cover all sports, obviously mainly focusing on football and the 2 basketball sports and baseball. But yeah, www.insidepacksports.com. You can find me on Twitter at InsidePackSport.
James, really appreciate it. Found you a little over a year ago, been following your stuff ever since, and obviously really happy to have you back on the podcast. So really appreciate it. We'll be following NC State throughout the season. We're looking forward to have you back on.
Yeah, man, and let's do something for basketball. I see the basketball conference.
I know, right?
We got Will Wade in Raleigh, man. We're going to have to talk about that.
I know. It's going to be exciting for hoops. I'm hoping Virginia Tech has a little bit of a bounce back. They've put a little bit more NIL into hoops. So I'm hoping for
that's what matters, man. Too. I think Mike Young's one of the best coaches out there, but it's like, look, you can throw your hands in the air. If you don't have the NIL, you're in trouble.
1,000%, man. I love him. Big fan. James, appreciate it, man. We'll talk soon.
All right. Take care now.
All right. That's James Henderson, InsidePackSports.com. Please go check out the website. He does terrific work there, he and his team. We'll be back. A couple more previews. We got a week 0 preview. We got a week 1 preview just around the corner. Football is here, folks. It's here. So please check out our YouTube, youtube.com/@the ACC Football Podcast. Follow us on Twitter @BC Podcast ACC. We'll be back. Until then, go Pack, go ACC.